Welcome to Cine Bijou, where we delve into the diverse creative world of independent film with your host, Ramon Wrights.
Hello everyone, so glad you tuned in. Every fortnight through feature explorations and insightfully fun interviews, we'll make Cine Bijou your destination for discovering hidden gems and supporting the voices of indie films that deserve to be heard. So grab your popcorn and settle into your seats as we shine a spotlight on emerging filmmakers, thought-provoking narratives, and groundbreaking techniques that redefine the art of storytelling. Part 2 of our special series spotlighting the 20th anniversary of the Hollyshorts Film Festival looks at a compelling story set in a UK beach town. Co-written and directed by Benjamin Verrall, Shouting at the Sea is an emotionally charged film taking us on a journey of rekindling friendships and personal reflections. Two friends, Joe and Catherine, played by Harry Mitchell and Maddie Rice, reconnect in the seaside town of Hastings where they grew up. They confront the past, reflect on who they've become, and conclude the conversation that tore them apart. It features Daisy Haggard as the voice of the ever-present sea, narrating a tale of memory, belonging, and vulnerability. This intense yet touching and highly relatable tale is sure to make waves when it premieres in competition at Hollyshorts next week. We spoke with Benjamin about the inspiration behind this deeply moving story, the challenges of capturing raw emotions on screen, and what it was like working with this phenomenal cast. So sit back, relax, and get ready to dive into the making of Shouting at the Sea. What's your background, Benjamin? Where are you from, and what's your education, and what led you to pick up a camera and be a filmmaker?
Okay, so I grew up in Hastings, where Shouting at the Sea is set. I come from a family who have always been interested in the arts. My sister and my brother pursued acting, so not being the most competitive of people, I decided that it would be far better for me to be behind the camera rather than in front of it. Of course, that said, you know, filmmaking is a very competitive industry, so I didn't really work that one out very well when I was 8 years old. But yeah, I mean, I've always just loved films, really. When I was a child, I was really interested in early cinema. I think I was really just looking for a hobby and something to collect. So I discovered this rich vein of memorabilia around Charlie Chaplin. And I used to collect a lot of Charlie Chaplin memorabilia. And that led me to a real interest in early cinema, and particularly the sort of films that Charlie Chaplin used to make, I think, are similar to the sort of films that I would like to make, not silent movies, but ones that explore pathos. So ones that explore the sort of interesting overlap between tragedy and comedy, I think. I think when it's done well, the movies that manage to show tragedy as comedy and comedy as tragedy are the films that I love the most. So in order to pursue filmmaking, I went to a film school in Surrey, did a degree there. And then following on from that, I worked in television for a little while, making factual entertainment programs, not drama, and then moved into education. But drama's always been my passion. So when I got the opportunity to start my own company, the idea was that I would always use any profits that we had, any reserves, to make dramas and to use that platform of having a company in order to pursue my first love, which was drama.
That's an interesting background, and you've obviously got some good influences there. Chaplin's quite an interesting one. He's a very visual filmmaker and performer. So let's just talk about the theme that resonates through the three films that you've, well, two of them you've written and directed. Shouting at the Sea, you co-wrote with three other people. We'll get to that in more detail. But there's definitely a theme going through all of these films. It's very reflective, very character-driven. You explore the human factor, if you like. our fears, our hopes, our loves, our dreams. What is it about that kind of story that appeals to you, that makes you want to put it onto film and show it to the world?
I think it's what film does exceptionally well, first of all. I feel like, theatre's brilliant, radio's brilliant, novels are brilliant, but the one thing that they all miss is the close-up. And the close-up in film is the most beautiful thing in the world, because when you get the right actor, you feel what they're feeling. Particularly in the cinema, if you're confronted with an image of a fellow human being at billboard size, and you are watching them emote, you're watching them feel something, that I think is one of the most powerful things in cinema, powerful things in art, full stop, I would say. So from a cinema point of view, I'm interested in people, and I'm interested in that, especially the idea that we can really empathize with characters in a way with cinema that is virtually impossible in any other medium, I think. And then in terms of stories, I mean, I'm just interested in people, is the honest truth. I think that human beings are endlessly fascinating. There's a Maya Angelou quote, which is something along the lines of the greatest pain anyone can have is to not tell their story. And there's the other sort of cliche that everyone's got a novel inside them. I truly believe that. Like, I think everybody's life story is deeply fascinating. Most of the time, we don't explore that. Most of the time, we say, "How are you? I'm fine," or talk about what we do for a living and so on. But when you have a deep connection with another human being, that to me is fascinating. And if there's a way in which I can, in some small way, show that through film, then I think I will be successful. And I'd say Shouting at the Sea is my most successful attempt of that so far. But it's something that I will continue trying to capture on film for the rest of my life.
So it's interesting about how you mentioned about the camera pointing at the face, because it's the face where you see the emotions play out. You see what they're going through. And it kind of reminded me, there's so many good examples of that. I'm sure we could sit here and wax lyrical about just how great filmmakers have done that. But one thing did spring to mind. I don't know if you've seen it. It's a film called The Long Good Friday.
Oh, yes.
In the early 80s. So that ending scene where Bob Hoskins' character is in the taxi, in the car.
Yeah.
And he realizes his fate, and the camera kind of just stays on him, and you see the range of emotions he goes through, from shock and denial to acceptance of his fate. I think, and your work kind of reminds me a little bit of that. I could definitely see very subtle reactions from the characters of Joe and Catherine in Shouting at the Sea. So it's interesting you mentioned that. There's an element of that from what I saw in Shouting at the Sea. It's a very British film, isn't it? Because it conveys, the setting is a very British seaside town. I'm sure people all over the world who live by the sea can relate on some level, but this is very British. The two-piece slot machines, the claw, the piers, and the funicular railway up and down the cliff, which reminded me of Linton and Lynmouth, by the way. I don't know if you've been down that one at all or visited that area. It's a very, very British film. It's a very British story. But people can take something away from it, because at the end of the day, it's a very human story. What was it that made you want to work with Kate, Ruth, and Amelia on this one? Who came up with the idea, and what drew you to this story?
That's a brilliant question. So I'm a great believer that film is a collaborative art. And I think that where my previous films may not have been as successful as this one were in the writing process, because if I write it and I direct it, there's less checks and balances along the way. The the writing team are basically the team at Toffeeham, which is the company that I run. And about this time last year, I said, look, I want to make a short film. Let's make a short film. But let's do something slightly different this time. I'll write a structure. And then what we're going to do is we're going to go to Hastings and we're going to discuss it on location and think about the characters and think about the story collectively and work on it together. And all of the writers come from different seaside towns. So I come from Hastings. Kate and Amelia come from Seaford, and Ruth comes from Folkestone or near Folkestone. So we all have this sort of common attachment or common feeling for the sea. But we're also different ages and have different perspectives. And what I discovered through the process of writing in a different way this time was, first of all, how important it is to get some different perspectives, right? If you're writing characters who are in their early 30s, getting the perspective of some people who are in their early 30s is very helpful, I think. So it really was an exercise in just seeing how to get better, really. You know, I'm a fervent believer in learning and always trying to do your best work. Whatever the work is you're doing at the moment should be your best work. Whatever work you're doing in the future should be better than that. And I really wanted to involve the team much more in the writing and the creative side of this. And also that was partly a learning opportunity for them to see how it all works, so that they're not just organising the shoot, but actually heavily involved in the creative. But most of all, I mean, I know it's better as a result of their direct involvement. We pored over that script, you know, line by line, and really making sure that each line of dialogue really felt authentic and real, which created a challenge, which I'm sure you'll come on to, of finding actors who could deliver those lines. But when we were getting to the point of casting, we felt like we had a very strong script that felt real to all of us. And I think that was really important in the process.
Yeah, I agree. It was a very authentic, very real script. I think it's just because you really did get the sense that the two were just talking, that they were thinking, and then they were just pouring their thoughts, their feelings out. And I think what broke it up quite nicely, more than anything, was just the little, I mean, they're innocuous lines to anybody listening, but little things like Catherine saying, "Oh, I forgot my charger," and then moaning that her phone has died. These are, yes, they interrupt the thoughts. That's a natural conversation playing out like that. I mean, were those things inserted in there to make it feel as natural as possible for the actors to deliver?
It's funny, isn't it? It's like it's a combination of two things. I think there's a bit of exposition. So, you know, I forgot to put my phone on charge allows us later on for the phone to be dead when her husband tries to call her. But the interesting thing about exposition, I think, is that it's often done badly in dialogue. It's often, you know, very obvious, be pointing to certain plot points, whereas in real conversation we actually do that all the time ourselves. You know, if you're running late for something, you might say, oh yes, what time is it, or something like that. You do in real life create moments of exposition just to help you get through a conversation, or to help you in lots of different ways. But I also think that there is a sense of being distracted. I think I read recently a book about how to write dialogue, and in it somebody said, you know, when you're speaking on the phone, you're not just static and talking on the phone. What you're doing is, you know, putting food away in the fridge, or you're you know, patting the dog, or what, folding up washing or something like that. And in real life, most conversations don't happen in the way that actually in Shouting at the Sea they happen, which is quite an intense way. So therefore, in order to try and create a bit more realism into it, I think having those moments of distraction, whether it's, a bird pooing on Catherine or remembering that her phone's not on charge, I think they help break up the intensity of those conversations.
Yeah, I think you're right there. Actually, it does. It's a little bit of a respite for what is a very, very deep sort of dialogue going on there. But again, interesting little things as well is I think too many times when you see people talk on film, you look at people like Woody Allen. I mean, whatever you think of Woody Allen as a person, as a filmmaker, he does intense drama, comedy, dialogue brilliantly, but they're always forever looking at each other and over exaggerating. So here you've got Joe and Catherine just sitting, talking, but not always looking at one another. They're just, because they're too busy, I think, trying to get the words out right, much like I am in this interview, actually, trying to get the words out right so that they're clear on what they're saying to one another and that the expression is there. And I think that's played out really well. It's a very natural, real, normal conversation, the way people talk. So I thought that was done really well. But in the backdrop, you have got the ebb and flow of the sea. And the sea is given a voice that narrates the story. What for you and what for Kate, Ruth, and Amelia was the goal there, to have the sea, to have the voice of the sea narrating the story?
In a sense, the narration isn't telling the story, it's almost telling a counterpoint to the story. So and one of the things we discussed in the writing process at quite some length was what the purpose of the sea was in the story. And I think one of the discussions we had, which I think probably comes through in the final film, was this idea that although for Catherine and Joe, their story is very intense and very dramatic and huge in their lives, for the sea, the sea's seen it all before. The sea has been there since, for thousands, if not millions of years, and will continue to exist long after these small human dramas that play out in front of it all the time will have been forgotten. And so we wanted that contrast, really, that idea of there being this vast force of nature that exists sort of in an indifferent way, and quite small people believing that their dramas are huge, but actually will be forgotten very quickly after they've passed on and after they've died. So I think that was partly it. The other thing is, I think when you grow up in a seaside town, the sea is ever present, right? The sea is everywhere. You hear it all the time. And if you can't hear the sea, then you hear seagulls. You're always near the sea when you grow up in a seaside town. And it does have a personality. It does impact the way in which you look at the world. It definitely, I think it's very different growing up on the coast versus growing in a landlocked town or village. So I think there was that was part of it as well. And the sea has quite a poetic voice, but Daisy Haggard's narration underplays that, which is absolutely right, because it's really just sort of more observations on what it is to be human, but through this perspective of the sea.
Yeah, I get what you mean. I really do. And as someone I mentioned earlier, who's spent and still spends quite a bit of time in the sea, it's the perfect place to be lost in thought, or to see actually how how insignificant we can be to the vastness of the sea.
Yeah,
out there. You really do feel like about quite small here in the grand scheme, which is okay. It's okay to be that.
It's perspective, isn't it? Because I think that no matter how, as I say, one of the reasons the film's called Shouting at the Sea was that I think if you grow up in a seaside town, at some point you are going to shout at the sea because it does it gives you a release, but it also puts your life in perspective. No one can hear you, you can't. Your shouting is drowned out by the waves. You realize how small you are, really, but at the same time, it's very cathartic because you can just let go and it doesn't matter.
There's an interesting thing I picked up as well, which I tend to find in stories about people who leave a small town and who then revisit it or revisit their past in general. When people go back home, so to speak, they're looking for something. And I think in the case of Catherine, she's achieved things in her life and has things in place. She's escaped from a place where she admits she felt trapped, yet she's come back home for some perspective, if you like, to reconnect with her past, and especially with Joe, with whom she shares a special connection, which is quite an interesting dichotomy, isn't it, really?
Yeah.
What is it, do you think, is about the past, childhood memories that A, makes us want to revisit them but not necessarily live there, and B, kind of makes us not want to let go? Because they both do have challenges in letting go of their past, which, in all intents and purposes, was pretty good for them.
I think that when people have something unresolved in their life, I think that's the thing that's really hard. And it's funny, I think that some people are still very much attached to their childhood for lots of different reasons, and other people move on from it very, very easily. Some people sort of almost reset when they get to be adults. They right, this is my new life, this is my new identity. But I'm in the fortunate position where I do have lifelong friends, and one thing that I know about having friends who know me at 47 who also knew me at 14 is that they're never going to let me forget the 14-year-old. And that's a good thing because it grounds you. It means that no matter how successful, in inverted commas, you are in your adult life, having people who know you really well and know how very silly you were growing up is very helpful. So I think there's that. I think there's also something. I mean, there's a very big tradition in independent films, especially, of the idea of people returning home. I'm thinking of things like Young Adult and so on, where it's about, you use the word, that dichotomy between, here I am, I'm a successful adult, I'm doing well, yet as soon as I return home and reconnect with people from my past, all of that goes out the window. That doesn't really matter anymore. So I think it's always a really interesting story, the return home story. And I feel like with Catherine, she needs to conclude the conversation she had with Joe. And when I say the conversation, I mean a continuing conversation. Their friendship was interrupted when they were teenagers. And I feel like what she needs to do to come home is to reconnect and somehow finish that ongoing conversation. I don't know what happens after the film, but I feel like they may never see each other again after this moment, this day together. But that coming back together was so important to both of them.
Especially for Joe, who is quite lost in this story as well.
Yeah.
He laments frequently about the loss of his father, but with the loss of his father comes the loss of Joe's dreams and ambitions of what he wanted to pursue. So there is that juxtaposition, isn't there, of two people from the same area, one who's quite successful but still something missing, and the other who has not done what they've set out to do in life and is feeling even more lost. I mean, it is quite an intense. It's played out very softly. It's quite a mellow film, and the cinematography by Tom Hooker is just superb. It captures the atmosphere of a British seaside town beautifully. And it's a soft-going film. There's nothing hard on the eyes or the ears, but the intensity between these two somber yet sort of happy-ish individuals is quite intense, isn't it? And it really does make you reflect inwards. Is that something you're hoping this film will do? Is touch those parts of the audience within, and maybe make them sort of self-reflect, and maybe even come to accept the parts of those that they feel are unfulfilled or that they could do without?
I think one of the things we set out to do when making the film was to create a really impactful drama without resorting to drama with a capital D. These two people have stories to tell, but they're not going to shout and scream about them, except at the end of the film when they shout at the sea. But I think there is something in. Well, I think, to be perfectly honest, did we set out to have this effect on an audience? Probably not, if I'm honest. However, the reactions we've had from people who've watched it suggest to me that this is something that happens. And it's a huge privilege to hear that, in all honesty, that some of the reactions we've had from people have been that, the most common reaction, I think, has been, I started watching it as a film, and then I got caught up in their story, and I just listened to it like it was a real conversation. And I felt like I was being witness to real life and wanted to know more about these characters. But I do think, because of the way in which we've shot it, and because of the way in which Maddie and Harry perform their roles, there is space in the film for people to have their own thoughts. And I do feel like that space does lend itself to people considering their own lives and considering the people who may have had an impact on their lives when they were younger and so on. I think I would have been a genius had I set out to make that film rather than it happening by just by the love we put into it. But yeah, I mean, it's such a huge privilege to hear how different people react to the film, because it does seem to catch people on a deeply emotional level. And that's why I think it's a more successful film than my other two, and that is a lot to do with the performances of our two main actors, who are, I mean, we were so privileged to have them on set. They are superb.
Absolutely, and the chemistry between them was very natural. They felt like you could feel the connection.
Yeah,
between them, couldn't you? It's almost like they just took the script and made it their own, as if that was their lives playing out. So you're obviously happy with the finished film, and you've gotten some great feedback. How about your collaborators? Are they happy with it? Is there things they would have liked to have changed?
There's always things you want to change. Always things, unfortunately. One of the things that I know that all of us share, though, is this quite magical thing, which is difficult to describe. But when you make a film or any artwork, you go through highs and lows as you're making it. And I think we knew we had something quite special once we started filming with Harry and Maddie. We knew that their performances were excellent and elevated our script. When we came to edit, we actually also divided up the editing process, which was quite fun because it meant that what we could do is we could focus on individual scenes. So each individual scene has its own cadence, its own shape. And then that also meant that the first time we watched the film all together was the first time any of us watched the film all together, because we were literally putting together the scenes as an assembly. And at that point, the sound wasn't very good. It was just a dialogue track. But we all stopped and were like, wow, there's something really good here, like something better than all of us here, which is really lovely to feel. And the strange thing is that even though I must have watched it about 50 times now and through the editing process, and the rest of the team has certainly watched it over and over and over and over again, every time we watch it, we find something different in Harry and Maddie's performances. So we are still discovering new things in the film, which is a really lovely thing. I'm not bored of it, which is, amazing for me not to be bored of something I've made. There's so much going on. And like when we saw it for the first time on a big screen, and you see so much more on the big screen than you ever do editing on a computer. And it does feel to us even that we're watching real people, even though we wrote the script and we know they're actors. By the time you get to the last scene, you just get absorbed in them, and you believe in them, and you believe you're watching real people having a real conversation, not words that you wrote in a screenplay.
Agreed. And I'll tell you something, it's a story I'd be interested to see what it would look like on the stage, because it comes across as if it could have been written as a stage performance. I mean, you could even throw in the audio of the sea and Daisy Haggard's narration.
Yeah.
So because the characters are so strong, the dialogue is so strong, and the chemistry between them draws you in, and you're caught up in what's unfolding towards the end. So you've obviously gotten good feedback. You all have, and you're all happy with it. And now the film's going to be screened at Hollyshorts, which is a big short film festival in Hollywood. How does that feel?
Oh, it feels amazing. I've got to be honest. Hollyshorts was one of the film festivals we really wanted to get into. It's got a fantastic reputation and shows some amazing films. It's Oscar qualifying. So, it's as short film festivals go, it's top tier. It's not quite Cannes or Venice, but for a short film festival, I think we would consider it, the one that we really wanted to get into. And it's our first, it's the first one we have got into, and hopefully we'll get into a few more. I'm off with Amelia this week to go and experience it, and as that 8-year-old who was fascinated by Charlie Chaplin, the idea of going to Hollywood and getting to see my own film on a cinema in Hollywood Boulevard is beyond exciting.
And it's the Chinese theatre on Hollywood Boulevard, isn't it? It's Grauman's theatre that is the holy site of cinema. I would imagine you'll be seeking out Charlie Chaplin's Star on the Walk of Fame.
Yeah, absolutely. And a few other people's as well, I think.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure you enjoy. I've actually been there. I visited it once, and it was a dream come true for me. So I think you're in for a real good time there. Does the fact that the festival is an Oscar qualifying one, which puts you potentially in the running to be considered for an Oscar nomination, how does that feel for you? Do you feel like you've reached the pinnacle of a filmmaker and that the only way is up, or?
Well, I'm very aware that there are, a lot of brilliant films, short films made every year by lots of different people. I would, above all, I'd love the film to get some recognition. I think mainly because I really want to share Maddie and Harry's performances with the world, because they are very special performances. And we've been spoilt by them. So in terms of the pinnacle, obviously we're thinking about the next film, but now we think about the next film with actors of that caliber, which is an interesting thing. How do we find the next Harry and Maddie for the next film? So yeah, I mean, it's a dream, isn't it? And it's an Oscar qualifying festival, but there's lots of films in it, and I think you have to win an award in order to qualify for putting yourself forward as an Oscar nomination. But yeah, I mean, I think we've got some Oscar winning performances in it. So
yeah, well, you're in with a chance. So,
absolutely, yeah.
Well, it sounds like there's a real sense that you're very excited about this. Like it's resonating off the screen. I know people. I mean, I speak to different people all the time, and even no matter how big or small the event, the nerves kick in, and there's somber faces, but there's a lot of sort of excited energy coming from you. I think I think because you've got such a passion for this film and this story, so it'd be interesting to see how it's received.
Yeah, I'd be really interested to see how it's received. And I mean, I'm energized also by the team. It's so lovely to do something as a group project within Toffee Hammer. So the whole, if it's only a small team, but we're all very energized by it, very excited by it, and loving being able to. For me, it's a huge privilege to be able to talk to people like you about the film, because you don't get the chance to talk about what you do very often.
No, that's true.
Interested people. So yeah, and I say it's better than. The film is better than any of us. We always worked in service to the film. We always worked in service to the story. And I feel like I put together an amazing team at Toffee Hammer in the first instance, and then our extended team with Tom Hooker, as you mentioned, on cinematography, but also the soundtrack by Richie Johnson, which also is another character in the film. I think he's done an amazing job doing that very tricky thing of writing something beautiful that doesn't overpower the drama.
Thank you for joining us on Cine Bijou, where we shine a spotlight on independent films and the creative minds behind them who continuously push the boundaries of storytelling. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to hit that like or follow button and subscribe so you never miss an episode. You can also find us on social media. Why not follow us on Threads, Instagram, YouTube and Facebook for all the latest news, insights and views from the world of independent film. We also love hearing from you, our listeners and followers, so why not drop us a comment or maybe even send us a message. Until next time, keep listening, keep supporting and help us keep the indie spirit alive.